For today's lesson, we are going to look at quadrilaterals, and I typed here in our boxes, we must now change how we think of these shapes, not as pictures, but as a collection of attributes or characteristics. So for example, when we talk about a parallelogram, we're not necessarily thinking of that rectangle that looks like it's falling over. We are thinking that parallelogram is a way for us to remember that both pairs of opposite sides are parallel and also equal in length. So now what I'd like us to do is we need to list all quadrilaterals with at least one pair of parallel sides. So our first option would be, I'm going to start with the one that has only one pair of parallel sides, which is the trapezoid. Then we go parallelogram, next we have a rectangle, rhombus, and we have square. Alright, next we need to list all possible names for a square. Now, at first glance this sounds kind of weird. It's like, okay, it's a square. But a square based on its properties would also be a rhombus, because all sides are equal and opposite angles are equal. It would also be a rectangle, because a rectangle has 4 90-degree angles and opposite sides are equal and parallel. A square can also be known as, sorry, I was going to run out of room. A square would be a square, a rhombus, a rectangle. It has the same characteristics as a parallelogram. And don't forget a quadrilateral, because it has 4 sides. And we haven't mentioned it, but it goes right along with quadrilateral, the quadrangle. The quadrangle has 4 angles. So here what we're going to do is I'm going to work to show you the different names and what is what. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a parallelogram, and I'm going to put an X on anything that is a parallelogram. So I'd be asking myself, I will start here with parallelogram and I'll work my way across asking, is a parallelogram a parallelogram? A rectangle, a square, a rhombus, and a trapezoid. And this should give us an idea of all of those other names that these shapes do have or could be called. So a parallelogram is obviously a parallelogram, a rectangle, a square, and a rhombus. It is not a trapezoid, because a trapezoid, as we described it, has only exactly one pair of parallel sides. A rectangle is a parallelogram, a rectangle is a rectangle is a square, and a rectangle can be a rhombus, but only if it's a square. But every rhombus is not a rectangle, so I am not going to put an X there. So a square is a parallelogram and a rectangle, obviously a square, and a rhombus, because of those equal sides again. So far this trapezoid's out by itself because it only has that one pair of parallel sides. A rhombus is a parallelogram. A rhombus most of the time will not be a rectangle. A rhombus will always be a square, and it will always be a rhombus. And then a trapezoid, with its exactly one pair of parallel sides, will be none of these except for a trapezoid. So again, the idea of this is to just show you how these relate. We have some obvious ones when it matches up for itself, like a parallelogram is a parallelogram, but you can see a rectangle, a square, and a rhombus are all examples of parallelograms. And a rectangle, and so forth and so on, you can see how they kind of relate to one another. And to wrap it up, I have a few for you to try. I have a true or false. All rhombuses are squares. So all rhombuses are squares. And then we have 2 division problems for us. which is 6 divided by 1/4 and 4/5 divided by 7. For our division problems, I put in there to keep times flip, so our first number always stays the same. We change it to multiplication, and then we flip or take the reciprocal of our second number, and then we multiply straight across.